Charisma Quotient. I'm your host, Kim Seltzer, a dating and makeover expert, where I will help you build confidence, make connections, and find love from the outside in. Okay, before we get into this episode, which is all about modern dating, I wanted to mention that I have something really exciting coming up. It is new to kick start things for anyone who is wanting to date, to flirt, and really know how to make a great first impression. For the first time ever, I am doing a special hybrid virtual speed dating event for the holidays where you will learn the key points of making incredible first impressions and have a chance to meet singles I have handpicked just for you. I am not going to probably do this many more times. So if this sounds interesting, definitely hop on here. This is for you. If you feel kind of rusty and dusty or completely out of practice with all of this stuff and you're not sure why you're not progressing on dates, or you struggle to put yourself out there and engage in conversations, this is happening December 11th, but you have to register soon. Obviously, seats are going to be limited because I need time to match you all. So just go to stophatingdating.com. That's stophatingdating.com to register and sign up. And I hope to see you there. And now we are going to start the episode. Once upon a time in a land far, far away, there was a time where men and women picked up the rotary dial phone to ask someone out. The choices were simple of who to date. I mean, it was maybe Bob next door or Susie across the way. And people had time to really cultivate a connection without much distraction. I mean, there were no cell phones, imagine, no dating apps, no social media, and people rarely traveled. And so then, after a series of dates and perhaps chocolates and sweet nothing notes, if two people really liked each other, the man fell on one knee and asked the woman to marry him. And then they bought the house with the picket fence and a couple of kids and lived happily ever after. Well, seemingly so. Remember those days? I mean, some of us do, a lot of us don't. And in the modern world, that sounds archaic and almost impossible. In today's fast-paced and interconnected world, finding and maintaining meaningful romantic relationships can be daunting and overwhelming. And from navigating dating apps to managing expectations in the digital age, there are numerous challenges you face in your quest for love. And now you throw on top of the fact that there are so many kinds of relationships, right? We have situationships, we have friend with benefits, we have, all kinds of things, which is actually a good thing. And the dating world has become a paradox of choice, really, offering many opportunities to meet different people, yet making it harder to find someone truly compatible. And the abundance of options can lead to dating fatigue. And the modern age has introduced new ambiguous rituals around dating, altering the very fabric of courtship and romantic relationships. In fact, I'm finding that there isn't even a sense of courtship anymore. So, is it even possible to think about marriage? What kind of relationship, if you really think about it, do you want for yourself and your age and where we are today? I remember I was working with this woman, and she was, the quintessential high achiever. She really focused on her career, and then it got to the point where she wanted to settle down, have a family, and here she found herself in her 40s. And it's almost like she woke up in a world that she had been asleep in, and she's like, oh my God, I haven't even dated and I don't even know where to begin. And she was like treating each dating situation as a business transaction. Like she was literally dating as a businesswoman, and it wasn't working for her, obviously. And there was no sense of fun, no sense of flirtiness, no sense of courtship and pacing. Like all of that was daunting to her. So I really had to teach her the art of dating and pacing and flirting and being in her feminine, because she definitely had a lot of masculine energy being in the workforce for so long. And, what I told her, and this is my whole focus, is I know you're like racing to get to the altar and the finish line. But in efforts of doing that, you're actually wasting time. And she didn't understand what I meant by that. And I said, well, you're so busy trying to vet all these guys and treat each person as a business transaction that you're not even slowing down and appreciating the moment and connecting with like some amazing guys that you're literally just, passing by or passing off, I should say. And so she learned the art of dating and she took the time and then she started having a lot of fun with dating. And as soon as that happened, of course, guess what happened? She met her guy and it really took her by surprise. And in the end, they ended up getting married. And she is one of my highly success stories today. But like if I had shown who she was to all of you back then, you would never even think that she would be ready for marriage or even end up in marriage. So it can happen with a little bit of intention coaching and of course, the strong desire to do that. So the transient nature of the fast pace in modern dating can impact long-term commitments and the institution of marriage, really. The ease of meeting new people and the emphasis on independence and self fulfillment can sometimes overshadow that desire for the long term stability and the commitment. So, anyway, with me today, I have a very talented and fun woman who's going to help me talk about navigating the modern dating and relationship world and how to define what you want for yourself. She's amazing. She is a New York Times bestselling author, mental health advocate, relationship expert, and now with a master's in psychology and comedian. I love her already because she has the combo that I love. Her new book, I Do, I Think, Conversations About Modern Marriage, is a witty, incisive take on modern marriage to make the leap of faith a little less scary for Gen Z and millennial adults like herself. And I would go so far to say, even like people who are dating in the second act can learn from this. She is also the author of Overthinking About You. And that's like a disarming combination of her personal story and expert advice, all written in a candid, empathetic style. She also has developed shows with FX, Netflix, MTV, YouTube Red, and 20th Century Television. And let's just say she does a bunch of things on the internet. Welcome, Allison Raskin. How are you?
Oh, thank you so much for having me. Wow, you really went deep into that bio. I appreciate
Oh yeah,
it.
I was like, well, you do so much. I'm like, how do I, capture that in a paragraph? And obviously, we're going to talk more about you now. So, thanks for coming on. And as I told you off air, I was just super fascinated with this whole subject matter, and I love that you're focusing on this, especially like in your age group. But honestly, like as I was saying, this can apply to everybody in the modern dating world. So I don't know. I just first of all, I don't know your story at all. I would love to hear like how you got into all of this and do share.
Sure, yeah. I'm originally from New York, but I came out to Los Angeles for college. I got into the USC screenwriting program, which nobody thought would happen. And so that was like kind of one of those life-changing moments where once I found out I was in, my parents were like, goodbye forever. And I was like, goodbye. And so I really started off with the intention of just being a kind of traditional screenwriter. I really wanted to work in TV comedy, but I took a class that was all about webisodes and said, the future is the internet. This was like in 2010, and they said my professor was like, make content for the internet. And I was like, okay. And that has sort of allowed me to now do all the things that I've done. I worked at BuzzFeed Video back in 2014, 2015. And that really helped me grow my own YouTube channel with my partner. That's called Just Between Us. And honestly, I shared a lot of myself on that channel, and I shared a lot about my struggles with dating and my struggles with my mental health. And then I kind of like leaned into that part of being a creator. So in addition to, writing fiction and writing novels and TV shows, I also have this segment of my life that is very focused on the intersection of dating, relationships, and mental health, which is part of why I went back and got a master's in psychology so I would know a bit more what I was talking about. And then on the personal side, I went through a broken engagement in 2020 that really came
Ah,
out of nowhere. I was sort of very abruptly left by my fiance, and that really made me reevaluate my views around marriage, which was something I had wanted my whole life. And suddenly I was like, oh no, what if it's not this thing that I thought that it was? And
mhm.
so I started this investigation of, how can we approach marriage while knowing that there's a huge risk that things won't work out? Like, what can we do to set ourselves up for success while also being okay if eventually, it does end in divorce? And also, how has the history of marriage influenced modern marriage versus like what is the future of marriage and what is the possibility of marriage, which I think we're in a really exciting time for now that it's not like societally necessary the way it used to be.
Yeah, that's super fascinating. And I love that you come from your own story. And, I always find that we're our own best teachers every single time and this journey. And it continues. So I would love to hear maybe some of the things that, well, even in your personal journey that kind of hit you when it comes to this notion of marriage and maybe some of the struggles that people have.
Yeah, so for me, I was really bad at dating and being in relationships, and that's a lot of what my first book, Overthinking About, my first nonfiction book, excuse me, Overthinking About You, covered.
Yeah.
Really about that intersection of how my mental health was so dependent on how my relationships were going, but also the other way, and how I wasn't really in control of myself in these relationships. And it was like the worst part of me was always kind of coming up. And so learning how to take better care of myself, how to have a better relationship with myself. Um, and then finally feeling like, okay, I'm now in a good place, but now there's another person involved, right? So
Yeah.
how do you navigate like a lifestyle of, constant negotiation, accommodation, compromise, support, while like maintaining who you are and what you want, and also realizing that choice isn't for everyone. Like the choice
Mhm.
to be partnered is not the right fit for everybody, and it's also sometimes not the right fit for everybody in every stage of their life. There might be people who are married for 10 years, they have kids, they realize they don't want to be married anymore, they happily co-parent and for the rest of time, just like opening myself up to a lot more possibilities and flexibility around relationship structure, rather than feeling like I need to be married forever to one person, and if not then I am a failure.
Yeah. Well, and I love that because I think that throughout the years, that paradigm has shifted so much. I mean, think about like our grandparents era where there was just no choice. Like I love that there's
Right.
choices of what people can have, but also that the D word, divorce, is not a dirty word any longer. That to your point, people can decide what is right and what is not right for them in that moment in your life. And I always kind of joke, I feel like marriage is sometimes could be like a contract between two people, and every 10 years you could renew the contract or you'd move on, like, because
Mm-hmm.
we're different with each decade,
Yep.
and so I like that notion of just, being able to be okay with whatever happens because that can trip people up, especially because I see that in my clients. Like they're going out with fear, and that fear is causing them to not date well or pick
Yeah.
partners that aren't right for them. So, like, I just wondered also, like, in your journey, and maybe you talk about this in the book, just how did you overcome some of those challenges, especially with your mental health?
you know Medication helped a lot.
Yeah.
I was diagnosed with OCD when I was 4 years old, and so
Mm,
I was on meds from 4 to 12 and then 18 to 21. But then I spent my 20s being like, I don't need medication. That was a mistake. Medication doesn't work for everyone, it's not necessary for everyone long
right.
term, but for my specific, biological makeup, I'm someone that does so much better on medication. And so, sort of going back on medication in my late 20s, and then finally being able to sort of integrate all the things I had been learning in therapy that whole time, but didn't really have access to, was really helpful. And just like starting to like myself, enjoy myself, just this major shift of like, whereas before, if someone rejected me, that meant that something was wrong with me. And then I
Yeah.
started to notice, like, oh, if someone isn't interested in me, my reaction would be like, what's with them? And like that's such a different way to show up. And then getting more comfortable, I'd say, with the uncertainty, with things
Mhm.
progressing at a speed that was not what my anxiety wanted, sitting in the discomfort. I will say I am now married and successfully so far. And our speeds to getting engaged were very different. Where coming out of my broken engagement, I wanted that commitment right away, so I could be like, this time I'm good. Whereas he was like, no, like it takes a certain amount of time for me to know you, to trust you, to feel ready for this. And so I talk in the book about just like how people can have these different commitment speeds, but what's most important is that the destination is the same, and that you just like have an understanding of why someone might want to move slower and why someone might want to move faster, and then you can sort of meet in the middle, but that it's not like a direct reaction to how they feel about you. So being
Mm.
able to like take myself out of the equation a lot helped, and being able to not take things so personally was super important.
Oh my God. Well, yeah. And a couple of things that you're saying is so important. I mean, one is that you got to do the work. Like, you really do have to look at yourself. And it's not until you really feel settled within yourself, that you have your own confidence, that you're not dependent on the validation of somebody else, or the text that you get, or the DM that comes up, it that's when you're ready. That's when you're really ready, I think, to open yourself up, and attract the right partner for you, because otherwise you'll attract like a lot, I always call it a lopsided, situation with your relationship. So, yeah, no, I love that. And then also the whole thing of just, that communication piece once you do find somebody, it's so true, because we all bring our baggage with us, and it's what we do with that baggage is what's important. Like, you could dump it on each other, or you could say, "Hey, here's what's in my suitcase. Let me see what's in your suitcase."
Right.
And
And
how can
here's what
we
I'm
like,
gonna carry, and here's what you're gonna carry. And
yes. And could we unpack this together? And
mhm,
are there ways to combine suitcases? Like,
right.
I think that that's so important with that. Well, and I know that in your book you also had stories of real life couples break down, kind of the pieces of today's marriage conversation. Do you want to talk a little bit about that? Because I'm curious about some of the findings that you had.
Yeah, so the book is like a mix of my experience, my like investigation, because as I was
Yeah.
writing it, I was dating, getting engaged to marrying my now husband. And then I also interview all of these experts about like, I have a chapter that I start the book off with that's like about the history of marriage. So I'm interviewing like sociologists, I interview financial advisors, divorce lawyers, couples therapists, therapists who are trauma informed. But then I also interspersed throughout all of this are these segments of like real life couples and their stories. And so I feel like I really like the combination, because it's like, okay, because sometimes you get advice and you're like, but what does that mean, or how does that play
Yes,
out, or like, but in
exactly.
real life, what are we dealing with? And so these people were so generous with me, and shared their stories and their experiences, and it really kind of runs the gamut. People, but I'd say that like what's interesting is even people who have had bad experiences, who have been divorced, who've had bad marriages, who come out of it, very few. I'm close to saying almost no one was like, and I hate marriage, I disavow marriage. Like, some people said I wouldn't get married again.
Yeah.
Laura Stassi, who's a great podcast host. I don't know if she would get married again, but she's looking for a life partner. But like, she also understands why younger people would get married, and so it's interesting that despite all of like the bad stuff, there is still this pull of marriage and this allure of marriage.
That's really interesting, because I find the same thing to be true. And I also see like a generational difference between how, people view marriage, like people who are dating in the second act, which I work a lot with.
Mm-hmm.
Um, they just don't necessarily want to get married. And it's
Right.
not that they're against it, to your point. They're just like, don't need a contract. I'd like a travel buddy. I'd like to,
Right.
like have a companion or, there's a different definition because they're different now
And the
versus
needs are different.
the
Like
needs are different. Yeah.
the
Yeah.
protection that you need is different. If you're going to have kids with someone, if you're not going to have kids with someone, if you're going to leave the workforce or not, like things like that. Like coming into it with more assets, sometimes you don't want to get married because it just gets too complicated.
Yeah. No, it's interesting. Well, and in your interviews, did you find that there was some information about how people felt with commitment and compatibility?
What do you mean? Sorry.
Yeah, well, like some people like the couples, I think that issues around like commitment is huge when it comes to a certain contract or marriage. And
Mm-hmm.
was there, and again, it's just more of a question that I had as you were talking. And also with compatibility, like because there's so many different things that go into being a couple, and
Right.
I didn't know if there were like certain, I don't know, key themes or elements that were extracted from these couples. And it could be anything, not just commitment or compatibility. It was just something that came to mind.
So one of the chapters is sort of about like how do you pick your partner? Like how do you
Oh,
know
uh-huh.
if like you're compatible enough with somebody? And the answer is like it's different for everyone, but there are
Yeah.
certain traits that will make your life easier if you're sharing it with another person. And one of those is the ability to just like compromise, right? Like as I was sort of
Yes.
alluding to earlier, one of the parts of partnership is that you have to account for this other person's feeling in life for the rest of yours. And so, having somebody that has some flexibility, that has some wiggle room, that is willing to, value your needs the way that they value their own needs is really important. And then I would also say that having the shared values, I
Mhm.
find to be more important than having shared interests. So,
Oh, 100%. I'm so
you
glad you
know,
said that. Yes.
like you can like for example my mother unfortunately passed away last month, but before that she was married to my father very happily for 45 years, and they couldn't have more separate interests. Like my dad's like a poker, tennis, like what else does he love? He loves poker, tennis, fancy baseball. My mom like wants to read Russian literature and knit. Like they had some shared interests, but they had a lot of different interests, right? Like for their first date, he invited her to see King Kong, and she thought he was kidding because like she was used to going to like art films. But they had the same outlook on life, and they valued the same things. They both like really prioritized family. They had the same ideas about like how to raise their kids. They had the same politics, like that kind of stuff is like what's going to carry you through. And like whereas it can be good to be with someone who has like some separate interests than you, because either they could introduce it to you or they have their own social circle outside of your relationship. But it's really hard, I think, when like you just view the world totally differently and you prioritize totally different things.
I'm so glad you highlighted that because when I'm working with people, a lot of times what's on their list of like the must haves have to do with like looks, activities that they like to do together. It's kind of like these superficial things that seemingly are important, but in
Mm-hmm.
the end, you're absolutely right. It has to do with, the values. And, I do this thing called data dating, and I have people fill out charts as they're meeting different people on compatibility and chemistry analysis. And it's really interesting because when people take the focus off the shiny objects and they're really looking at that deeper stuff, all of a sudden they see people differently. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
and to the positive and to the negative as well.
Right.
So and I actually think it works sometimes better when people have different interests because then, like say the man likes certain things, he can also do those things with his buddies. And I think it's really important to have a separate life from the couplehood that, like you have time
Definitely.
with the couple as a couple, then you have time with your friends. That's super important. In fact, I know a lot of marriages that fall apart because they didn't have anything outside that interests them and they had no other like social circle and friendships. So I think the balance is really important. Yeah, that's interesting. What are some other of the chapters that maybe you want to share and tease the audience with?
Well, there's a whole finance chapter because I think,
Oh,
something exciting about modern marriage is the idea of like a single breadwinner pooled income, shared income is like there's more options now, especially now that so many households
oh,
are dual income, and also just this idea of how do you navigate, different spending habits. Are you doomed if one's a spender and one's a saver? Spoiler, you're not. And just sort of like how important it is to get comfortable talking about finances with your spouse, because it's an important part of life, and it's really important for both people to be involved and informed, even if one person has less experience or natural skills around the topic, because most people at some point will be single either due to divorce or death, and so having an understanding of how your finances work is really crucial, and important. And then I have a chapter all about couples therapy, but couples therapy as a sometimes as a preventative tool. So how it can be really useful even if you're not having problems. But like I really recommend that couples who can afford it do premarital counseling. It's expensive, and unfortunately our healthcare in this country is awful, and so it won't be covered. But if you have that ability, it's like an incredible resource to help support and set you up for success. And then another chapter about hardship, how to navigate that. And the final chapter is about divorce and sort of like how we can reframe our approach to divorce, and that can actually make for happier marriages.
ooh, I like that. Yeah, and all those things that you talked about, like, the money conversation and values, and that also goes back to your upbringing as well, because you learn about money and conversations and how you feel about money through your upbringing. And then
Mhm.
you have two people joining forces, being brought up maybe very differently. So you have to, again, it's about compromise, like you were saying. Um, and I love that you have a chapter on just the couples therapy, because that's another beautiful thing about this modern world is that it used to be something that was shamed. It used to be something that was when you had problems. And
Right.
now I love that we're doing more proactive and preventative work. That's what gives me hope. I don't know, like your take on it, especially since you've, been focusing on it. As much as the modern world is noisy and it's been kind of hard to navigate everything, we've been in a state of recalibration because it's like the pendulum, we swung from one era all the way to the next, and we're trying to like figure it out. But I think it's so hopeful because we have so many resources and things are more accepted than ever before. So I think people can have more choices and be open to talking about it. So I feel like that's what your book is doing. It's like opening up that conversation. I'm really curious though, if you can tease a little bit more about the divorce chapter. So what are some things that are in there in ways of like relooking at divorce?
So a big thing for me was realizing that like it's not about the length of your marriage, it's about the quality of your marriage, and sort of this idea that just because two people grow apart doesn't mean that the whole thing was a waste, right? I think
Yeah.
sometimes it can be like, oh well, I ruined my life. I gave you the best years of my life, and like it's like, well, if you had a nice time during those years, and that's wonderful. um, and and
Right.
just this idea of that how we approach marriage, where if we approach marriage with this idea that we have to make it work no matter what, it puts so much stress on the couple. It can start to feel like a cage or a prison. It can prevent people from feeling like they can grow and explore and expand as individuals because there's this fear of like, but will I change the dynamic? But really, like, if you go into marriage saying, like, I'm agreeing to a certain type of marriage, whatever that marriage means to you, for me, that means a marriage filled with respect and laughter and love. And if I'm no longer in a marriage like that, then I haven't agreed to that. And so, therefore, we maybe shall part ways. Um, and just this idea that it's not a failure, it's an experience, and that oftentimes people learn a lot going through a divorce. It teaches them a lot about what they're looking for, what works for them, how they want to behave in future relationships. And so to really just sort of like lean into this as an option for a reason rather than like something that like we should all fear.
Oh my God, that's awesome. I know I tell that to people all the time too. It's like the relationship, even bad ones, are things that you can grow and learn from.
Hmm.
And I don't even see them as bad. At the time, it feels awful.
Right.
But when you get through it, you look back, you're like, okay, there was a gift there. There's something that I really grew from and learned from. And it will help you know what you want for the future as well. And thank goodness nowadays we can have, the second act, third act, fourth act if we want, when it comes to relationships. And so I really like your message. Do you have any kind of final thoughts about how the book, as we talk about, what goes into marriage and how we look at things, can help daters to get to here? You know what I mean? Because that's that I'm seeing people and from the beginning, when they're
Right.
getting back out there. And then, yeah, a lot of them do move on to marriage and some of them don't, and which is cool, but I'm curious about it.
I
Your
think
take.
one of the things is helping figure out, is this something I'm even interested in, right? So,
Yeah.
there's probably a lot of single people out there that are like, I maybe want to date, I maybe want a partner, but would I ever want to get married, or would I ever want to get married again? And so this book could maybe help you figure that out. But I also think there's just like a lot of tools and conversations for partnership in general. Like, I have questions at the end of every chapter that you ask yourself and that you ask your partner, and I think you could always ask yourself those questions now, and then the questions with your partner you can ask on the fifth date. Like that. I think that the more open we are, with ourselves and with each other, and really get into the nitty gritty of like how we view relationships, what relationships shaped us, it can help us sort of be more productive when we're dating, because we can get to know each other on a deeper level, and on a level that will be like more helpful for us as we're gathering that evidence of if this is someone that's a good fit for us.
I love that. Allison, you're awesome. I just, any kind of ending words of wisdom that you want to throw out as you think about like all the stuff that we talked about, and also please let everybody know how they can find this book.
My final thing is just, I think a lot of people, and especially a lot of people, socialized as women, feel like they can't say that they want to get married, that's like that will turn people off, or like you have to like trick people into it. But I really am a proponent of like, it is a lifestyle choice, and if this is the lifestyle that you want for yourself, then you deserve to say that, to own that, and to go after it. um, and
Love.
then you can get my book anywhere books are sold. Again, it's called I Do, I Think, Conversations About Modern Marriage. I also have a weekly podcast called Just Between Us, and an Instagram and Substack called Emotional Support Lady, that are both mental health focused.
Beautiful. Love it. Love it. Thank you so much for coming on and sharing.
Oh, thank you for having me.
And thank you, you listeners, for joining me today. This has been the Charisma Quotient, and I'm your host, of course, Kimmy Seltzer. And remember, you can build confidence, make connections, and find love from the outside in. And if you want to know more, make sure you go to my site, kimmyseltzer.com. And if you struggle knowing what you really want in a relationship and are having a hard time navigating the modern dating world, book a private call with me to gain clarity and help you map out a dating plan for you. And also pick up Allison's book, like What a Great Marriage, and to really get some clarity. Just click the link you see in the show notes to book that. And remember, working on you is working on your dating life. That's all for now.